Hey everybody, this is the Sliders Review, and welcome to a special edition of Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Okay, before I start, I made a huge mistake in this video. See, it's been a while since I watched it and I relied on memory, and when I looked on IMDb, I got the two actors mixed up. So, Robert Ito plays Haido Koda, and he is the samurai who taught Duncan, not Akira Yoshida. So every time you hear me say Akira Yoshida, just know I'm talking about Koda instead. So my bad. The Akira dude was the one having the affair with the woman in the episode. My bad. Alright, on to this video. Highlander, the series, season 3, episode 1, The Samurai. Highlander was a great series, and it should never be forgotten. It was based off of a movie, and it later spun off into a television series. The Samurai, season 3 was around the time I started watching Highlander. And so this episode is very special because it tells the story of how Duncan got his katana. Duncan's katana is nearly identical to that of Connor's MacLeod katana. Connor's has a very similar handle. It's white. It has like a gold hilt, and at the end is a dragon. However, Duncan's and Connor's dragon are completely different. Connor's is more of a ball, looks more like a tiger's face, whereas Duncan's is more of a skinnier, slender dragon with a long snout. It's one of the most gorgeous swords ever, and I own it. Oh, I remember when I first bought mine, man. I was in college and stuff. And like, because I lived on campus, I had no way to get back home at the time. I had to like hide mine in the dorm. But boy, I cherish that sword so much, so much. Everybody loves the Highlander sword. And so this episode is very unique because, like I said before, it tells the story how he got his katana. It's through the lineage of a family, the Yoshida family. And so Tamlin Tomita, she plays two characters in this. She plays Midori, and she also plays Midori's ancestor. Also, Hiro Kanagawa. I can't say his name that well. He plays Akira Shakido, the man who gives Duncan the sword. And this episode is very interesting because of the simple fact, it tells the story how he got his sword, but also the sword fight towards the end is one of the best in the entirety of the series. Also, this episode is fascinating because it's very rare in the series do you get a person playing their ancestor. That normally happens all the time in the movies. And so first I'm going to get into like all the flashback stuff before I get into the present day stuff. So the flashback stuff, we see Akira himself walking along the beach shore of his shrine. And there he sees a man face down in the water. That man is no other than Duncan MacLeod. He was shipwrecked. And Akira believed him to be dead because he was. See, Duncan is immortal. There's only one way and one way only he can die. You have to take his head. Of course, Akira did not know that. When he finds Duncan, some men show up, guards. So he fights the guards off while Duncan is coming too. And so Duncan helps, but Duncan's sword play is very weak. After they best the men, Duncan wants to celebrate, but Akira ain't having it. He chops Duncan's sword in half. And it is then he decides he's going to teach Duncan the way of the samurai. He constantly calls Duncan a barbarian because he said that's what they call white men from the West. They call them barbarians because they come into the East and they try to conquer and everything and try to like destroy. And so Duncan, he teaches Duncan martial arts because first he wants Duncan to like, spar with him, but Duncan is no match for him because Akira knows martial arts and Duncan just knows boxing, and Duncan is like Irish and he always acts like he's drunk. And so like then he teaches him the way of how to fight with a katana. And it's really interesting because he tells him, use your arm as high as like put it as high as a mountain, and then with the force of the mountain, you strike down. And so he tells Duncan, one day you will be better than me with this sword and stuff. But Duncan does not believe that. Akira constantly keeps leaving his home, and when he does, he tells his daughter to attend to Duncan's needs. Every time his daughter is around Duncan, she has a very grumpy exterior towards him, and she keeps putting her head down, will not look him in the eye. This is something I've heard about from a friend of mine when I was in college. My friend is an idiot, just for other reasons. And he told me one time he wants an Asian, he's white by the way, a white, and he told me he wants an Asian girl because they're subordinate. And I didn't quite understand what he meant by that, and or why he would want a woman that constantly keeps her head down to him. He's arrogant and stuff. But this now reminds me of that. Oh, by the way, the year takes place in the 1800s when they're in feudal Japan, and this show came out in the 90s. And so, like, it's a really hilarious scene when Duncan is taking a bath. He's soaking in the tub, and like his that man's daughter and a friend is trying to like teach Duncan how to bathe. Duncan tells them that he bathes once a month. 'Cause that's how people used to do back in the day, and they tell him how he stinks and how he needs to take a bath every day. They also teach him the way Japanese people take a bath, a way I never knew. They say that, or she says that they bathe on the outside of the tub and then they soak themselves in the inside of the tub. That's the Japanese way. I never knew that. And so, like, the next time her father leaves, he wants her to teach Duncan the tea ceremony. And, he eats like raw squid and this and that. And he doesn't understand why Akira's daughter hates him so much. And she tells him. See, the reason why Akira keeps leaving because he has to talk to the shogun. The shogun has forbidden white people from coming to the land. And if you do not kill them on sight, you will die and everything, and your entire family line will be disgraced. Because Akira did not kill Duncan and fought those soldiers off instead, he must now take his own life. And so the shogun has granted him the honor of taking his own life instead of him being executed by a soldier. And he wants Duncan to assist him. But Duncan does not want to do that. And so they go back and forth, and he tells him how like we're friends and I just can't do it, and he tells him you must, because and all this other stuff. But then Duncan tries to negotiate, telling him that he is immortal, and in fact when he found him on the beach he was dead. And Duncan tells him in front of everybody, just run him through with the sword and he will not die. Akira does not want to do this because he does not want to be disgraced and everything. He does not want his honor like soiled and everything. And so in the ritual, Akira stabs himself with a dagger in the gut while Duncan takes his head. And that's all the flashbacks we get. Now, one thing that's interesting is that Highlander, the end game, kind of contradicts a little bit of this episode. When we see Duncan, he's not that great of a fighter, and he's stumbling around and all this other stuff. But in Endgame, the movie that happened many years after the show ended, we see Connor teaching Duncan everything he has to know before the Connor leaves him and everything. And I think that take place in either 16 or 1700s, while this episode take place in the 1800s. So Duncan was not acting like, well, he was acting a little bit like a buffoon, but not as clumsily as he was in this episode. But that's the problem with the movies. They always try to wiggle things in between and stuff like that. And so after he takes his head, or before he does it, he gives Duncan his sword. Duncan, before he takes his head and knows anything about like Akira having to die, gives him his I forgot what it's called. Not like binoculars, but like a telescope or something like that. Whatever the tiny one called. And Akira is surprised. He's all like, I didn't know barbarians can create something so magnificent and everything. It's like, wow. And so that is the story of how Duncan got that sword. Now, the present day stuff. Midori is having an affair on her husband. She's living in Japan, and her husband is a white immortal. And so because of this, her husband is pissed and he kills her lover. Now, before Duncan took Akira's head, he told him he will look after Akira's family and their children and their children and their children as the generations pass if they ever needed his help. And so, because Midori witnessed her husband killing her lover, she now needs help. Why? Because when he forced her to have love with him, she stabbed him in the back. And so now she is scared. So she heads to America or Canada. I can't remember which one Duncan lives in. And she looks for Duncan. Duncan has now finally returned from Paris. And Charlie still works in his dojo and is happy to see him. When him and Midori talk, she tells him of this ancient prophecy of how they have to find the Duncan MacLeod and, to help save them, stuff like that. What don't make no sense is that was 200 years ago. What would make her think that there's a Duncan MacLeod in the modern day? See, she knows nothing about immortality. But, this is the 90s, so whatever, you know what I'm saying? And so he's finna head to Japan with her. But when he goes to her hotel, she sees her husband alive and she can't believe it. And Duncan senses the immortality in her husband. See, apparently this is what happened. She was about to lose her ancestor's shrine. And so she met this white American man and he paid the money to keep it. Because of that, she felt she needed to marry him, but she became his property and she hates him. And so that's how he treats her, as property. Basically, he wants her back. She won't go back. Duncan tells this dude straight up, like, look, man, I have to protect her from you and and stuff like that. But this man wants no beef with Duncan. He just wants his wife back. But if Duncan don't give it back, then you know what's going to happen. So he sends some men to go, get her. But Charlie whoops their behind. Because of this, she feels like she needs to leave back with her husband, and she gives back the binocular and everything. So Duncan realizes, all right, she must be in Japan, so he heads back there. The time in which it gets from America to Japan happens within seconds. I don't understand that. She is shocked to see him, and Duncan is ready to whoop on that of her husband. He shows her his sword, and she can't believe that he has her ancestor's sword. The sword of Yoshida. And so he tells her it's been passed through his generation from 200 years. But of course, he can't tell her about the immortality thing. So he tells her to head back inside. And it's one of the most beautiful fight scenes we've ever had in this series. But the dude, her husband, Michael, tells her, this is holy. No, MacLeod tells him we're on holy ground and we can't fight here. But Michael don't care. So they fight anyways because holy ground is sacred and immortals are not supposed to fight there. And so like it starts off in the grass and then it goes towards the beach shore where they go in the water and they fight there. Then it goes back to the shoreline on top of the rocks, these big old rocks. And you know, it's an amazing fight scene. Duncan takes his head and he gets the quickening. Duncan can do the quickening better than any other person on the show or movies. However, this quickening was a little lackluster. And so, yeah, this was like a really cool episode and everything. And, you know, it's a shame that the show ended the way it did in this last season, because that was not a good last season. But at least the first movie made up for it. Endgame. The Source. I can't even get through that movie. I have tried to watch that movie multiple times. I cannot. Happy Asian and Pacific Islander month, everybody. Alrighty, well, I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.